Okay, we are recording. Hello, everyone. I am very excited because I have three special guests with me today to talk about Stephen King's The Dark Tower series. And we are actually going to be talking about the first three books in the series. So that'll include The Gunslinger and The Drawing of the Three and The Wastelands, which I just read myself. And you can see Mike has his books out there. So we're going to talk the first three books in the series. Before we do any spoilers, though, we are going to discuss the series, a sort of a why you should read conversation. I'm going to ask my three guests what they love about the Dark Tower series and why they think other people should read it. Speaking of my guests, let me introduce them. We have Sarah from Sarah Reads. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Philip. Thanks for having me on today. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And I've invited Sarah because, one, she is a Stephen King fan. And so I'm very interested in hearing what she has to say about the Dark Tower series. And also because Sarah is just brilliant. And because I really love, Sarah, how you have such great psychological insights into the characters in the stories that you talk about. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, because I think King is an author who certainly lends himself to a lot of psychological study. So this is going to be really interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to have you here. We also have Chaz, and Chaz's channel is called Bookish Chaz. I've talked about him before on my channel, but Chaz, this is the first time you're on my channel as a guest, and it's so great to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here, Philip. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm honored that you would bring me on.
Well, I'm honored that you're here, and you and I have been talking about doing this for a long time, discussing Dark Tower together. So here we are. So this is great. And we have Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, and he is probably a familiar face to my viewers. He's been on the channel a few times before. And Mike is here because I consider him to be the most knowledgeable Stephen King booktuber out there. I don't know if he would agree with that, but he's the guy I know who is, he's my authority on Stephen King. And he's a big reason, frankly, why I am reading the Dark Tower series. So it's just so great to have you here, Mike, to be part of this discussion.
Well, long days and pleasant nights, and thank you, Philip, here for having me on. Nothing I like more to talk a little bit of King, especially when you said you were starting to read this series. I was like, oh my God, yes, I can't wait. So I am excited to be here. As you can tell, big fan.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited for this palaver here today. So I think we're going to have lots to talk about. And as I said, we're going to start with a non-spoiler kind of pitch here for the series. And it is something I think that I especially want to do because I get the sense, and you guys feel free to disagree with me here, but I get the sense that King doesn't get enough love on BookTube. And I've talked about this a little bit with Mike before. And Mike, you mentioned how BookTube skews a bit younger and that King's readers tend to be a bit older. And I'm not sure why that is, frankly, because I think younger people would love his books once they start reading them. But I think, I was thinking about it for a while too. And I think maybe the fact that this series is so genre defying that it's tough to categorize. And sometimes when it's, in terms of marketing something, to be able to say, oh, this is epic fantasy, or this is sci-fi, or this is horror. You can't really do that with the Dark Tower. It's just such a genre defying thing. It also could be, that difference from anything else is one reason, perhaps. I also think that maybe, and I don't want to sound harsh when I say this, but there are a lot of fans of Stephen King who've read this series and who, very well-meaning, will say, oh, you have to read this and this and that and this book in order to get the Dark Tower. You got to do this and that. So I think that might be intimidating for some people. For me, I get excited when I hear that, and I think, oh, cool, I'll read The Stand then, and I'll read The Eyes of the Dragon, and I'll do this and that. But I think a lot of people might hear that and think, oh, I have to read all these other books in order to read this big series, and I don't know if I really want to do all that. So I don't know what you guys think, but I would like to get your thoughts on that, but also at the same time, let's do after that, maybe a nice sales pitch. So shall we start with you, Mike? Maybe your thoughts on the place of the Dark Tower within fantasy, and why maybe I feel like it deserves a lot more love on BookTube. Would you agree with that?
I mean, you know how I feel about it. I feel like all the stuff I could do a video on Stephen King, and I could break down everything in the most precise way, and like 1,000 people will watch it. But I could talk about like, hey, this character that's playing this character on Wheel of Time TV show got like a new wig, and it would get like 10,000 views. That's just how BookTube goes. So I've accepted that. I have accepted that, but I'm never going to stop talking about it because I love it so much. But I think you kind of hit it there where you say that people say, oh, well, you should read this and this, and there's an ultimate reading, or where people get intimidated a little bit. You don't have to. This isn't the MCU. If you miss a movie, you aren't going to be like, wait, what happened? You'll be fine. I do think that the Dark Tower, obviously, if you are a constant reader, as they call it, you will catch a lot of things that you wouldn't catch otherwise. But I don't think it's mandatory for you to read those things. It just kind of helps flesh things out, and it's fine to read them out of order. It'll make sense to you later. But there's this little diagram I've seen. It's a triangle, and it talks about all the different things that make something go from like science fiction to fantasy to horror. And you look at everything in there, and you'd be like, I get every single one of these in the Dark Tower. So I classify it as fantasy, but you can tell me you think it's science fiction. I probably won't argue. You can tell me it's horror. I probably won't argue. So It's got a little bit of everything. And I think that's what makes it so special.
I agree 100%. And that's part of the appeal for me. I am constantly surprised. Usually when I read a fantasy, I have a pretty good sense of what's next. King keeps surprising me again and again in the series, and I love it. I just love how different this is from anything else I've ever read, period. So for me, it's a selling point, but I guess when you're trying to describe it, it can hamper you a little bit. What about you, Sarah? What do you think about the place of the Dark Tower, and how readers relate to it and the stuff we've been talking about?
Well, I'm definitely with you guys. I think that it doesn't get enough love on BookTube for sure. The reasons that you've talked about, I agree with. I think it does defy a lot of genre conventions. I think people also get nervous because for some reason, and this is where I'm going to kind of deviate wildly from a lot of Dark Tower fans, there are so many people who feel that the Gunslinger is a weak entry. And so they preface you with this, like, okay, you should read it, but make sure you read books 1 and 2, because you need to make sure if you're actually going to like it. And I know I do that too, because it is tonally very different from the rest of the series. I think that builds up some apprehension in readers too, where they think, well, I have so many things to read, and someone's telling me I need to go into a series and I basically have to negate book 1, which blows my mind, because The Gunslinger itself is one of my favorite books ever. And I don't understand when people don't like it. But I think that adds to some of the skepticism about the series. But people are really missing out. On top of being this genre mashing epic, it's also rife with literary allusions. It's philosophical, it's psychological, it's so cerebral. It is an excellent series, and it makes me really sad when people say that they don't want to give it a try, because I truly think that obviously Stephen King is a very popular author. He's one of the best-selling authors of all time, but I think he really gets underplayed in terms of his ability to write and his ability to craft a story and to infuse that meaning into what he's writing. He gets passed off as like popcorn fiction, which I don't think is true. He's got some hits and some misses, but if anybody could read The Dark Tower and feel like that it is just a popcorn series, we must have wildly different ways of analyzing literature.
Yeah, no, I just love that you brought that up, because I agree. This hits the sweet spot of entertaining, but simultaneously really deep, and it's got some great themes in there and psychological insights. I love his characters and how vivid they are. So it's just fantastic stuff. By the way, too, I want to mention that there are booktubers out there who cover Stephen King. So it's not like there's a wasteland out in booktube. There's Brian Lee Durfee, for example. He does a lot of King stuff. Jason from Jason's Weird Reads. I know that Mark from Slowly Read has read some of the Dark Tower. So there are people out there. I don't want to discount that, but I do think that King is an author who is underrated on BookTube, and so in general. So Chaz, you're the perfect person to ask this question to, because Chaz and I are the newbies here. We have the experts. We have 2 experts in Sarah and Mike. And Chaz and I are just reading this for the first time. In fact, I have not read anything else by King, none of his fiction, except for these first 3 books in the Dark Tower series. And Chaz, I don't know if you've read any other King books or not, but you're new to this series, correct?
I am. I'm new to this series and fairly new to King. The only other book I read was It. And if somebody hadn't encouraged me to pick up the audiobook, I might have actually DNF'd that one.
Huh.
But yeah, the physical book itself was rough to get through. Not because it wasn't a good story, it was just such a chunker that I was kind of overwhelmed. But that's the only other King I have read. So, but my first experience with Stephen King was The Gunslinger, and I'll be honest, I did have some apprehension going into it because I've never been a fan of Westerns or Western movies or anything with a few exceptions. And I knew it was, at least the first book was very heavily influenced by old Westerns, things like that. So I went into it with a bit of apprehension, but I was very pleasantly surprised. I've always been a fan of the dichotomy between black and white, and he's following after the man in black, and trying to wrestle with those different forces. So I was hooked, but it did take me a while to get through book 1. And then when I finally did get to the end, it was such a huge payoff that I was like, oh, I've got to keep going with this. And especially because I knew that the drawing of the 3 was more of a portal fantasy. I love stuff like that. And just like you guys have already reiterated, this is the true definition of speculative fiction, because it pretty much hits every single mark. Fantasy, sci-fi, portal fantasy, dystopian, you name it, it's there. So yeah, I had never been sure I wanted to get into Stephen King, but I wanted to at least give it a try. And everybody told me start with The Dark Tower, so I did. And I'm very happy I did. I plan to read more of his stuff too.
I do too. Yeah, I think I want to read The Stand next, but we'll see. Yeah, okay. I got a thumbs up from Mike, so we'll definitely go there. But yeah, so this is a great sales pitch so far. I think let's give our audience a few more reasons why they should be reading Dark Tower. For me, I haven't read any or many other authors who gaze so unflinchingly into the human condition as Stephen King. I mean, he just tells it like it is, and warts and all, in all our awkwardness and all our glory, there we are. And it's unflinching. And there's also, for me, in the Dark Tower specifically, this quest is so, it speaks to, I think, the quest for meaning in the modern human world, because we live in an era, we like to say at least that in past eras, there was a more unified way of looking at the world within a culture, that, the surrounding religion gave people a sense of coherence and connection, and everybody had their place. That's actually a bit of an idealized version of the past. But nevertheless, I think there's this feeling that, since you could argue about the dates too, like since the Enlightenment, or since the Industrial Revolution, or since World War I, or whatever, we've been living in an increasingly dislocated world. The idea that there's a lack of coherence, that we have a fragmented sense of identity. And this is both on the macro level, on the large level of society, but also at the individual level. And this gets into, existentialism and all this other stuff, where there's just this human quest for meaning in the modern world and coherence, because it doesn't exist outside of oneself. So in a way, I feel like the quest that Roland and his companions are on is something that is very relatable. And the idea of the quest in general is something that probably people need to read about, because it helps us have a sense of meaning. That's what reading can give us. it can impose a bit of order into what is essentially a chaotic experience of life. So I love this idea also of the ka-tet and the concept of ka. We can talk about a little bit here. I don't think we'll spoil anything by talking about what ka is and a ka-tet, but the fact that the characters within the story get a sense of meaning, get a sense of purpose together in this group. That's a great thing about fantasy. I mean, King famously has said this is his response in a way to Lord of the Rings, right? Where you have this quest, this group of people who it's the quest is about not just the individuals, but it's about the individuals together, right? And the bonds that they form and all of that. So a lot of what our sense of meaning, where it comes from, is from the people that we're with, our ka-tet, right? So I love all this stuff. And so for me, that's a big thing I've felt at least so far in the series. So what are some of the most important things you would want to say to people about Dark Tower to convince them that they ought to be reading this series? So shall we start? Let's start with Sarah this time. Would that be okay?
Sure, yeah, that's no problem. We've touched on a little bit of it already. I think if you decide to read Dark Tower, you will be reading a fantasy series that I think, and I have not read everything out there, but I've been reading fantasy for a long time. It is unlike anything else that I have read. It is truly a blend of so many genres, and it incorporates those fantasy elements, like Mike said, the science fiction, dystopian, post-apocalyptic, the Western. It has all of these influences and it wears them very proudly. And I think it does this mixture very well. And I think that's a harder thing to pull off than people realize. And that's why we don't get a lot of these blends and why, genres people tend to stick to their niche. I think that it does that, but it also does it so well that you can't help but be pulled in. And I think part of what I really like about Stephen King in general, and not just in The Dark Tower, but as an author, is that he is not afraid to wear the things that have inspired him, his inspirations, on his sleeve. And he's not embarrassed if those inspirations are from childhood, or if they're from sports, or if they're from, pulpy genres, or if they're literary. You have, everything from philosophical questions like existentialism, as you said. We get that throughout the series, but we get a lot of that questioning of the universe throughout the first book especially. But then we also get literary allusions from T.S. Eliot all the way down to Richard Adams and, Watership Down. So I think that he does this great job of paying homage to the things that have inspired him. And I think that he must be a very astute person. He must be a very astute studier of the human condition. He understands people. You can't write stories the way that he writes them without understanding people. And I can talk about a little bit about that more as we get into some spoiler content. Yeah. But even in terms of from where I feel like I know the most, like in terms of that psychological exploration, he doesn't always get it right in terms of the technical jargon, but the way that his characters play out and the motions that they go through and the things that happen, the way things resolve, are very similar to the ways that these things happen in real life. And he takes those messy parts of humanity, as you said, and he puts them on the page. And I think that can turn a lot of people off. But I think what we really need to understand, and especially now, especially in this age of hyper analysis and very little room for error on anybody's part, we need to understand that crappy things happen. People act in ways that you might not like, that aren't always nice. That's just the way that the world works. And I think that Stephen King has such a good lens on humanity, and that's what makes him such a good writer of characters. And I think some of his best characters are in this book. So if you are a character, not even a character-driven reader, because there's plenty of action, but if you're someone who loves well-crafted characters, then you should check this out. If you love that meshing of genres, then you should check it out. If you love literary fiction, you should check it out. Yep. People say, and I heard, who was it who was talking about this? I was talking with somebody, I think last night when Alan went on Jimmy Nutt's channel to do a chat.
The
He was
marathon
talking about-
session.
Right. They talked about Stephen King, and Jimmy said that he wouldn't be able to recommend it to anybody. Like, he wouldn't know who to recommend it to. And I was like, that's very easy. Everyone, like, you should just try it. But I do understand where some people might be a little bit turned off, but I think everybody should give it a try. It is, in my opinion, it is a truly unique entry into fantasy.
Yeah, brilliantly said, Sarah. I couldn't have said it better. And I 100% agree with you. Stephen King must be very well read. And there are some just such an array of references in these books from, well, it's the Dark Tower series, you know, that comes from the poem by Browning, Child
Yes.
Roll Into the Dark Tower Came. And you mentioned T.S. Eliot, the Wasteland. I mean, he's pretty obvious with his nods there, but it's also, they're thematically informative of what he's doing. He's telling the reader, this is what I'm doing. If you want to know what I'm doing, read T.S. Eliot, read Browning, you know.
Read Browning. And it's so clear. Like, if you read, even if you just read part 1 of The Wasteland, if you just read those few stanzas that make up part 1, it's not just that he's taking this title from the poem. It's like you said, the tone, the atmosphere, even the allusions, because The Wasteland is also a poem that's full of its own literary allusions to other eras.
Big time. Yeah.
And it just fits so well. He maps this book onto that poem. And I think I don't know, I don't want to gush too much, but he does such a good job with it.
Please gush. I feel like I'm the only one who does it. Do it.
Right.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I think that he doesn't get enough credit in terms of just how well he crafts his stories. He gets tons of readers, and I think he always will, but there's a lot to dig under the surface for in these books, especially.
Yeah, beautifully said. Well, I'm going to let Chaz gush next, and then we're going to have Mike close out the argument for us. So Chaz, why do you think people should read The Dark Tower?
Oh boy, so many reasons, but for me, it's very, very much the character work, especially the rawness of all the subjects that he deals with within the specific character arcs. I mean, this is a guy who shows you the raw nitty-gritty elements of drug culture and drug addiction. He shows you the raw and oftentimes very painful and uncontrollable nature sometimes of mental illness. He shows you the pain of loss. And for me, I get very invested in my characters, but some books I get so invested that I'm just, I'm brought to tears, or I'm brought to anger, and I have to put a book down because of something that's happened to a character. And there were times I was just beside myself reading these books because I got so invested in these characters that he writes. And they are extremely and painfully relatable at times, even though I've never personally dealt with drug addiction per se, but I know I've had people close to me who have, and mental illness. I've had people very, very close to me in my life who have dealt with various types of mental illnesses, and he has such an authentic and raw way of writing that, and I think that's what draws me into these books the most, is the characters. And we were talking about there being something in this series for everyone, and there really is. I would recommend this to a non-fantasy reader. Great, you don't like fantasy, you don't have to read this series. There's really something for everyone. But yeah, the character and the life themes that are woven into it just are magnificent.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Chaz. Really, it is. And I completely agree. And, like you say, there's drug addiction and there's some really painful, there's racism in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's just some really painful stuff that I think King handles these things very honestly. And I appreciate that. You know, he doesn't pull his punches. And so there's an authenticity, even though this is speculative fiction, there's a real authenticity to his writing that I genuinely appreciate. So how about you, Mike? What are your thoughts on why people should read The Dark Tower?
You know, over time, I've kind of got this reputation as a guy who like didn't like Dark Tower because I complain about things that happen in books 6 and 7. I mean, I mean, I haven't forgotten the face of my father. This series has been so special to me. I mean, I read it when I was 19, which I happen to think is not a coincidence that it happened at 19. And then I was, you know, kind of actually had to wait for some of these books. So you have a little bit more expectations and stuff when you have to wait for things. But no, I adore this series. And it's for the reason that I adore all Stephen King, is that no one writes characters better in my mind. No one can make me care about words on a page more than this man has, because what he can do with his characters, and he is not afraid, like Sarah brought up, of showing you the ugly side of some of these characters. I mean, in these stories, in just these first 3 alone, we have a character who's done some very bad things, and we're going through a redemption arc. We got dealing with drug abuse, mental illness, multiple personality disorder. But what I think he does absolutely the best, better than anyone in the business, is the coming of age story under unusual and sometimes scary circumstances. And then you have, you know, which character, you know, I'm talking about there. But with this series, I think why it can work for everybody is there are 7 books, 7.5-ish, whatever you want to kind of call that novella there. But it's I think that each book is different. You'll never read one of these books and be like, wait, did that happen in this book or that one? Because each one feels distinctly very, very different. For example, The Gunslinger is very much like a post-apocalyptic Western. The Drawing of 3 is as portal fantasy with kind of like a fish out of water, man out of time kind of thing. Then you get to Wastelands, which in my opinion is very much, upon this reread, felt kind of like a love letter to J.R.R. Tolkien. I really felt a lot of that in this one.
Yeah.
And speaking on the Tolkien thing here, I think if I am doing a sales pitch for anybody for this series, I'm going to say it is Sergio Leone's A Man with No Name, Clint Eastwood trilogy, but they are set in a horror version of Middle Earth. That is kind of how I would sell this.
Nice.
Oh,
I like
that. that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that don't get you, I don't know what else will.
That is brilliant. Well, speaking of all these characters, I think it's time for us to start talking some spoilers. And we can begin that by talking about some of your favorite characters so far, or in the case of Chaz and myself. And of course, Sarah and Mike are not going to spoil the rest of the series for us.
You've met my favorite at this point, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I'm sure there are some really vivid characters to come, but our favorite characters from the first 3 books in the Dark Tower series. And I'm going to let Chaz begin us this time. So Chaz, any thoughts on your which characters do you love and why do you love them?
Oh, yeah. It's tough, but I have to say probably my most favorite is Eddie Dean. And he's just such a fascinating character, you know, coming from his drug-riddled past and running drugs and selling them to having been put in a situation where he had to basically clean up in a very real fashion overnight, even though it took him a long time to still wean off the drugs. He was just put in a position where he had to get off it. And the interactions he has with Roland, he's often that comic relief.
Yeah.
And I have to say, and this is just a side note, but I never saw the movie, and I probably won't, but I think they cast the Man in Black wrong, because when I read Eddie Dean, I hear Matthew McConaughey's voice. I'm just saying, every time I'm reading him, I hear Matthew McConaughey for some reason.
Don't watch that movie, Chaz. Don't watch
I'm not going to. Yeah. No.
I was so mad.
Yeah. I like the casting for Roland. I thought that was a good choice, but I'm not going to watch it. But yeah, I definitely, every time I'm reading Eddie, I hear Matthew McConaughey. It's just that slow South Texas drawl kind of. I don't know why. That's he's the voice of Eddie Dean to me, and Eddie is just a fascinating character. He's witty. He's quick on the take with some things, and some things he's just totally zoned out in his own world. but with very good intention. And just, yeah, fascinating to me. I like Susanna as well.
Okay.
She's a lot of fun, but I think Eddie would be my first favorite, and I'd probably like Roland second. Roland's an interesting one because he's even at the end of the third book, he's still extremely mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much we don't know about him, and he holds so many of his cards close to his chest. And yet there's lighthearted moments where you see his compassion shine through, and you see his vulnerability shine through, but then it's very quickly taken back. He's kind of like, oh wait, I'm not quite ready yet. So I love the mystery surrounding Roland, and that's what endears me to him the most.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Mike, do you want to riff off of anything Chaz said about Eddie or Roland?
Well, I mean, Eddie is my favorite character as well. I mean, it's hard not to. I mean, I love it. I think that's something that King does a lot is he writes versions of himself into books sometimes. And he'll write a younger version of himself, what he thinks he would have been like when he was older, just different things. Obviously, by now, we all know that King struggled with substance abuse quite a bit, especially during this time. So I think there was a lot of that there with Eddie, where he wanted to get clean kind of thing. But, what would you do if you were forced? You had no other option kind of thing. But I don't know. Eddie is very much to me just kind of like the I love a fish out of water story. And, so, you do this one way in one book, and then the other book, you kind of do it the other way. And I kind of love that about it. But Eddie's just reasons I can't exactly tell you guys yet in a non-spoiler section, but I love him to death. I think he is the levity that this story to keep it from getting super serious, because it would have got super serious. But I also love me some Jake, because like I said, I do love the coming of age story, and King always hits a home run there. And a series is only as good as its villain, and the Man in Black is one of the best ever. I mean, is that like the best opening line to a book ever, or what? So
It is.
From that moment, I was like, okay, I like this guy. And all it took was, one sentence for me to really, really like this character. So there is more to come.
It is iconic. We can do spoilers now, though. So if you want to spoil anything from the first 3 books on Eddie or not, it's totally fine. But
Eddie really, to me, just kind of feels like the reader times, like when they're conversing with Blaine, and he's always just like the only one there who's like, what the fuck are you guys doing right now? I was like, that was what I would be doing in this situation. Like, you guys are literally just doing riddles with a train right now. What are you doing? So I just think that he's just the voice of the reader at many, many times, even though I'm very Southern and Eddie is very New York, but if I'm like Chaz, I can read it like Matthew McConaughey now. He doesn't have to be a Bronx guy anymore. I can do it that way.
Yeah, that works. Hey, whatever works.
Yeah.
So cool. Sarah, any thoughts we're on the topic of Eddie. So do you want to talk about Eddie a bit?
Sure, I can talk about Eddie. So I read this series for the first time when I was 12.
Oh, wow.
Nice. So book 4 was coming out around when I was 12, and my dad was a big Dark Tower fan, but not a big Stephen King fan. He never liked horror. So the first time I read this series, it was without any other context. I had read The Eyes of the Dragon, I think, because I think he had that, because that was one of the only kind of fantasy related books of Stephen King's that he had. So when I think about, I do a lot of comparing, like reading these books at that age, and then the next like 4, 5, 6, and 7 as they came out. And now whenever I go back to reread them, I have very different perspectives on the character. So when I was young, Eddie seemed so old and so wise. And now I read it, I'm like, you're a 21-year-old kid. Like, and you get that difference in perspective. But Eddie's a fan favorite for a reason. He does add, like Mike said, a lot of levity to the series. He is the heart of the series in a lot of ways, and the heart of the ka-tet in a lot of ways. My favorite character in my first read through was Jake, which makes sense. Given the time of my life that I read it, I agree with Mike on a lot of Stephen King opinions.
This is what's great about King, though, is you read it when you're a preteen, it means one thing. You read it when you're in your 40s like me, and it's like, wow, I'm looking at this a completely different way. And so I'm glad to hear someone else say this.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I look back, like so many of the things, because I've read a lot more Stephen King now, I've read a lot more in general, studied a lot more. The things that I pick up on as a reader now versus the things that I picked up on back then are very different. Back then, I like to watch Westerns with my dad, and he it's very funny. My parents were very strict in some ways, but then also my dad gave me Stephen King books to read when I was 12. So there's a bit of like cognitive dissonance there. But yeah, he knew that I liked Westerns. He said, I think you'll like this. And I loved it. I have always loved it. But I looked at Eddie very differently back then than I do now. But I do have a lot of love for Eddie. I think Roland to me is the most compelling character. He's the one that I like to think about the most. He is the hardest one to get a read on a lot of the time. You, like Mike said, you can understand Eddie's motivations really well. He serves as that everyman in the series that, like you said, that what is happening? Please, somebody explain why we're doing this. And I think that's a good perspective to have. But Jake is my kind of longtime favorite. Roland is my favorite one, my favorite character to think about, I guess.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
I guess I kind of say I like all of them, Philip.
They're all great, right?
I love the ka-tet, even Oi.
And Oi. Oi is fantastic. I love
yeah.
a good animal companion.
Oh yeah, we love. Oh yeah, you gotta love Oi. You gotta have a little cute in here somewhere or other, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only problem, and Chaz and I were talking about this, is now we're scared that Oi is gonna, we don't know what's gonna happen to Oi. We're hoping he's gonna live through the series, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So no, these are great thoughts. What you said, Sarah, about it's the relationships too in this ka-tet that really bring each of the characters alive. For example, you mentioned, Sarah, the Eddie and Jake, and I love how Eddie becomes kind of an older brother to Jake, and his role in Jake's, I don't know what to call it, his drawing or his rebirth as they bring him into the world, and Eddie all of them play a crucial part in it. In this, I guess you could call him a kind of a midwife figure there in a way.
I look at it as he remembers how his older brother was kind of a turd to him. So he's like basically saying like, I kind of want to take the good things that my brother did, but kind of do it better with this new younger brother I have.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence. We're allowed to do spoilers now, right?
Yes, we're going full spoiler. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a coincidence that when he draws Jake through is when he's finally able to let go of his brother. That's when that phantom from his past finally lets go. I think that's very intentional, and I think that Mike's right. He gets to take the good things because he loved his brother. We know that he adored his brother. He gets to take those things and have that relationship with Jake, but also start to either mentor him or care for him in a way that he didn't get as a kid. And I think that's a very important rebirth for Eddie, along with it being kind of Jake's rebirth into their world.
I love it. Now we've got the psychiatrist talking. Yeah. That's
I also like that Roland got a chance at redemption with that, because he obviously pushed Jake to his death, and that was fated. That was meant to happen. We talk about Ka, but at the same time, he got a chance to be redeemed and rescue Jake the second time around. Yeah. And and
that's very important. I agree.
And it was really interesting, the spiritual, if you will, connection between him and Jake up until the point of that of drawing Jake out. The mental psychic connection that they had was just mesmerizing for me. It was written so well, and you really believe that Roland and Jake have this deep-seated connection.
Yeah, that's really beautifully done. And this theme of fragmentation, that's kind of what I was talking about, because Roland and Jake are both living these bifurcated memories from the point in time where, in one version of reality, if you will, Roland lets Jake die in the Gunslinger. And then later, of course, he saves Jake in Jake's own New York. And so Jake is alive, but he has a memory of dying, and they're both kind of going crazy. And this is something that you have echoes of in Blaine. Blaine the Mono is also a bifurcated entity. You have little Blaine and big Blaine, and his circuits are not all working properly. So you've got, this is an important thing, because this is this sense of fragmentation, of dislocation. is echoed in the world itself. The world has moved on, right? So that's a big thing in this series, I think, and of course that is alluded to very much in the Wasteland, right? The T.S. Eliot poem that this book is titled for, as well as the subtitles in here: fear and a handful of dust and a heap of broken images. So you've got this stuff all going on, and these people in this ka-tet who are, I think they're participating in healing each other and helping each other have a sense of wholeness. It's a beautiful thing. It's a very cool thing. So that birthing scene when Jay comes in through the mansion, and he there's the whole monster thing going on in the mansion, the guardian or whatever it is, and then of course the others who are in Roland's world are facing this demon in the stone circle that Susanna is primarily dealing with. We got to talk about Susanna here in a moment, but that scene.
Well, that was a fucked up scene, wasn't it?
Oh my goodness! I mean, how do you? I was struggling when I was doing my review. How do I put this? And I said, well, it was a very intense embrace.
She held right. The demon.
Yeah, you couldn't get any more intense than a demon abortion in book 1, and then we get this in book 3.
And I was expecting her to just sort of, through the doorway, just kind of expel the demon in there, and King delivered.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that really fascinated me about that, and really about her character in general, is she is one fearless woman. I mean, she has been through so much. I mean, being disabled and dealing with mental illness, and then having this demon on top of her. She's just fearless. I mean, she takes it because, and I think that's part of the life journey that she's been on, has made her just a fearless companion in the ka-tet.
Yeah. And speaking of fragmentation, of course, you have in the drawing of the 3 is where she's introduced. She is both Detta Walker and Odetta Holmes. I think, did I get that right? Yeah.
Yes.
You sure
so
did.
I'm dying to hear Sarah's thoughts on Susanna, actually. And I don't even know the proper terms to use in terms of how would you diagnose Susanna. She's your patient now, but you're talking about her to us. So if that's okay, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So technically, I guess if we want to go by the manual here, we're going to call her a dissociative identity disorder, which basically, so kind of in layman's terms, as Mike said, is kind of what we think of as multiple personality disorder, but it is that fragmentation of the psyche. And this is what I mean when I say that even if he doesn't always get the technical jargon well, and to be fair, these books were written in the 80s, the manual that we use to diagnose mental illness has evolved so much in that period of time. The way that people think about this has evolved so much in that period of time. King does a great job, I think, of showing mental illness, because mental illness is something that's talked about a lot in literature now, but I think a lot of the time we also put on our safety gloves when we either write about it or talk about it, because we don't want to upset people. I think fundamentally most people don't want to make other people feel bad, but we also, it's difficult to have a real picture of the world and a real picture of the struggles that people go through if you can't talk about the bad parts along with the good parts. And I think Stephen King doesn't shy away from that. And that's part of what makes him so good at what he does, is that he's all in whenever he writes anything. But what I see in the drawing of the 3 is that dissociative identity disorder, where you have these parts of your mind that have fragmented from each other, just to tie into that theme of fragmentation. And in the world, in people, the concurrence between that manifesting in someone and someone going through significant trauma is something like, and these are numbers I had to study for exams that are now in the past, but I think it's something like 95%. Like most people who experience that kind of dissociative identity have gone through some significant trauma. And so I think that it's really fascinating. I think he's done a really good job of giving us her life, and we get that symbolic crash of the brick. And that's what forces, that's kind of our external, a motif, I guess we can call it, our external symbol that we have that fragments her mind. But she's also this is, and I don't have the the life experience to speak on this very well. But the world that she comes from is very different than the world that we live in right now. Just living in the United States at the time that her character was living was in many ways a traumatic experience. She had to endure things that were unfair, that were limiting, despite the fact that she is this very well-spoken, very well-to-do. Her family is well off. She's clearly very smart, very articulate. She has to live this minimized lifestyle. She has to try to compress herself into this box. And is it any wonder that the savagery of Detta comes out of that, of this person who has so much to offer being stifled smaller and smaller? It's no wonder that Detta rises out of that. And I think I really like what King did with the resolution, because in order for patients to move on, real life patients as well, we look for something, we look for one of two things. Either you learn to accept the other personalities, we'll call them, or the other parts of yourself, or you consolidate, which is rare, but can happen. And that's what kind of happens with Susanna. That's where Susanna comes from. And I really like, I really like in the Wastelands how she can now utilize, she can recognize the strengths. Like Detta's a horrible person. She was awful. She was cruel and vicious, but she was gutsy.
Sometimes you need that person.
Right? Yeah. I need her now. I'm gonna pull her out because I need to get some shit done. So I'm gonna take her out and I'm gonna use her to do that. And I think that it shows us a lot of Susanna's growth and the type of character that she's going to become. And she has a big role to play. There's a lot more to her character that's going to come up. I'm excited to discuss some more aspects of her characterization, provided that we get together again as we continue to read.
I would love that.
For sure. Yeah. So that's really interesting, Sarah. Thank you for that. So dissociative identity disorder can result from trauma. And in the case of Susanna, which I'm going to refer to her as, because that is her whole identity, I guess, if you will. This was trauma both in a physical form because of Jack Mort and what he did to her, the serial killer Jack Mort, who was also the person, I think, who pushed Jake into the road. So there's some really cool connections going on. But so she experienced, when she was very young, having him throw the brick on her head, and that had very physical repercussions. But then later on, he pushed her onto the train tracks, and that's where she lost her legs. And so there's that.
Little piece of work, ain't he?
Yeah.
Boy, yeah, that's for sure.
But then there's this systemic racism that she experienced as an African-American woman in the 1960s in the United States. And so that's also a part of the trauma. And I think King wraps that all together really well in this character.
He does.
So, but it's powerful and it's tough to read at times. It really is. I mean, there are moments when I'm reading, particularly in the Drawing of the Three, some of the dialogue coming out of Detta, and it's tough to read. I mean, it's just painful. It really is, but it's also understandable as a response to all this trauma. So yeah, really well said.
Right.
Can I say something about Susanna?
Please, actually, I was going to ask you, Mike, to talk about Susanna. So perfect.
Kind of playing off of what Sarah talked about here is people talk all the time about like, wow, can you be like in the 1970s, we were still losing women from childbirth because it was, wow, it really wasn't that long ago. Guys don't realize is in the 1980s with mental illness, especially dissociative identity disorder, I'm just going to call it DID from now on, because I always just tongue twist. But people really either just kind of want to pretend that existed. Believe it or not, the popular theory in the 80s was that you were possessed by a demon. That was literally what the common thinking was, because we just want to pretend that it didn't exist. It didn't really happen. So King's always like, I'll talk about it. Why not? Stop me. You know, I'm one of the best-selling authors for a reason. Read it and deal with it. So that's what I've always really loved about it. But yeah, that's just such a layered character for that reason. He did it in the breathing method before this from different seasons. He did it as well. So if that's something that you are interested in, I would recommend going back and checking that out. Short story. It's one of the 4. And that read the whole thing, obviously, because it's great. But
yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I mean, he's a courageous writer for sure.
He really is.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on any of the characters? I feel like we could talk some more about Roland for a while.
He always gets swept under the rug, it seems like, just because he's the main character.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I think the
yeah.
next book you guys read for that's really Roland's book. So
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm at that point where I've learned a lot about Roland, but I
I
won't
bet
say
you have
anything.
some
Philip.
other like favorite characters in book 4 too. There's some great
oh,
characters.
absolutely. All these characters that he references a lot, you're going to find out a lot about them coming up here pretty soon.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. So, I mean, I've obviously, having read the first 3 books, I have theories about Roland and everything. But I initially thought of him as a character I liked, obviously, in the Gunslinger. I was hooked by reading the Gunslinger. I'm with Sarah and Mike, and I'm assuming Chaz as well. I mean, at this point anyway, I thought this was just a great book. It was so weird and trippy and nightmarish and fascinating. But here you have this guy who is so focused. I mean, I put him up there with other iconic characters like Ahab in Moby Dick,
Right.
or Feanor in the Silmarillion, right? I mean, these are people who just get, and his sons as well, of course, who take this vow to get back the Silmarils. These are people who are so focused on this one thing, this mission, this quest, this, in his case, it's the Dark Tower, that everything else doesn't matter. And so it's just this, and sometimes sympathetic, but obsessive personality. And we don't know exactly why he wants to go there. We don't know. We get senses that here and there that, okay, there's some huge losses. This is a cataclysmic post-apocalyptic world we're in here, and something really went wrong. But he's after this Dark Tower for whatever reason, and he cannot. I mean, he's willing to sacrifice Jake in the first book in order to get there, and that's messed up.
But it gave us one of the greatest lines in the world. There are other worlds than these.
Yeah,
I love that line. That's how I justify that moment happening. Hey, it's a great line, though.
But of course, it comes back to us in the Wastelands, where Roland is given an opportunity, and it starts really in the drawing of the 3 when he does save Jake. I don't know if he doesn't know the repercussions, that he doesn't know he's going to have a split, in his memory from that incident, but he almost acts, I think, for partly on instinct and partly because of the guilt he feels for what he did to Jake in the Gunslinger. So, I mean, and of course, he's so capable and so mysterious and so compelling as a character, but his obsession could easily be his undoing. And even in the Wastelands, he makes a promise to Jake, but internally he's thinking, am I going to keep this promise? And I love that, because King makes this character so real for me because of that. Even though he's mysterious, that feels authentic to me, that he would question his own willingness to really, stick to this promise. And we do see him do it in the Wastelands and prove to himself, because he goes after Jake once Jake has been taken by, who's that horrible guy?
Sure.
What was it?
The Gasher?
Oh, the
Gasher, yes,
Gasher, yeah.
Yeah, when he was kidnapped by Gasher, I mean, and taken to a TikTok man.
Yeah.
Whoa, talk about just surreal, that's some crazy stuff right there. We got to talk about Ludd and all the stuff that goes on there as well at some point, and Blaine. But yeah, Roland for me is an extremely mysterious. He's at the heart of this whole thing, compelling, and I was surprised at moments like in the drawing of the 3 when King shocked me by having Roland get some of his appendages shortened.
Yes.
Right from the get-go by the
love.
Lobstrosities. I was like, what? Wait, he lost his, how? He's the Gunslinger. He can't, no. So
I felt the exact same way, Philip. Yeah.
Right. So he's a seriously impaired character now too. I mean, off the toe,
and you will see more of that, Philip, as you go on. There are other physical impairments that don't get talked a lot about in literature that add to that authenticity. Like you said, you'll see some struggles from other angles too, and it makes them feel so real. It makes them feel so alive.
Such an iconic character. Chaz or Mike, do you guys have thoughts on Roland?
Yeah, Roland is. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I have lots. I feel like I can't talk about him yet because I know how this ends up. So
Okay.
I'll just say right now, he's great. I love him.
Well, yeah, for me, that Roland is definitely a fascinating character. You get a real sense, even from the first book, that he's experienced a significant loss of the brotherhood that he was part of. He's the last of the gunslingers. Something just extremely messed up has happened to eliminate the gunslingers, and then to lose parts of himself when he's already lost parts of himself emotionally, those bonds that he had, and now to lose physical parts of himself. He's obviously got a very strong bond with his guns, and now he's lost some fingers and such like that, so he can't properly shoot, and he has to hand that off to the new gunslingers that he's drawn out of the doors to do a lot of the shooting, because his left hand isn't as good as his right hand, and things like that. So he's experienced so much loss, and I kind of wonder if part of his journey to the Dark Tower, part of his obsession with it, is maybe he thinks, maybe I can finally make it all right. Maybe if I get to the Dark Tower, I will find some way to right all of these wrongs and rewrite history. I mean, we don't know for sure, but I get the real sense that his obsession with the Dark Tower is intricately tied to all of the losses that he has experienced.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. All right, Mike, any
Yeah, I do feel like there's a lot of growth. Like, you look at the character of Roland in just Gunslinger and look at him by Wastelands. He's much more different. Like, he would have never gave a shit about what Eddie said at the beginning of Wastelands. And by 3, you have where Eddie comes to with that confrontation. It's like, why won't you just like trust us? You know, we're in this, we're obviously not going to leave you. We're on this quest. You could die tomorrow and we're still going to try to go to the damn Dark Tower.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think that Roland would have been receptive to something like that in Drawing of the Three. He'd probably shot him, you know? But it's just, yeah, I think he's got a lot. I mean, look at how he had the remorse, obviously, about what happened to Jake, where I feel like at this point, he's like, okay, I wouldn't do that again like I did, you know, last time. I'm going to do whatever it takes to, you know, protect this kid now and stuff like that. So I feel like, yeah, he's definitely got some growth going on. But again, like I said, let's talk after Wizard Glass. You know, you'll be like, I get it now. Yes, trust me.
Okay, sounds good. But he does seem to be becoming more human to me.
He does.
From the beginning.
They are all rubbing off on each other. They are all
That's the ka-tet. Yeah, I mean, that's so true of human experience too. Let's talk about, now, obviously you two are going to have to hold in a lot of stuff here, but I have some theories about Walter.
I love them. Bring them.
The Man in Black, Martin, and then this guy named Richard. What was it? Richard. Richard something. The guy who revives the TikTok man in the Wastelands.
Fagan? Is that his last name?
Fannin or Fannin? Fannin. Yes, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
I think it's Richard Fannin.
I think so too.
Anyway, I think they're all, now, don't have to react to this, but I think they're all the same dude. I think that's my theory right now.
I've gotten that impression too.
Okay.
That the Man in Black is the embodiment of several different key figures in Roland's life, and possibly Richard Fannin as well. But I definitely got that sense with Walter and Martin that that the Man in Black is very representative of all that was near and dear, and all that he hated about those characters as well.
Yeah. This is a low-key kind of figure who loves to come in and mess with people and sow chaos and, you know, just kind of pull the strings and cackle in the background. I think that's what we've got here. I even suspect, knowing, because I've heard people talk about the multiverse and all that, I suspect this could be a character who is in other King books as well. And so I think it's a pretty safe conjecture, but poor Mike is like, yeah.
Well, and I won't say anything. I won't say anything either, because I kind of know, but I don't know for sure. Like I've heard tidbits, but it's not clear enough to me to know exactly.
And
So
see, this is the point
I have my
where when people
theories.
tell
So.
you, hey, there's this ultimate reading order, you'll know. It's like they say, if you've read the entire multiverse, you know these things when they pop up in Dark
Right.
Tower. But if you don't, I always look at it now. I kind of went back because I used to tell people not to start with the Dark Tower because you need to read a lot of the other books. But then someone kind of brought up, well, if you read the Dark Tower first, when you get those moments in those other books, won't they make sense the other way? I'm like, yeah, I guess they will. So you kind of got me.
Book 3 is very rich in those multiverse connections, though. It is they're some of the most obvious ones, at least in parts of book 3, to keep it spoiler free. Like there's connections in every book, and that's what I really like about Mike's ongoing Stephen King series, is when we get to parse through all of those connections. But book 3 will be an interesting one for you to think back on once you've furthered your King journey.
Oh, I love the connections, the Easter eggs, everything else. And he does it with his own books, but of course he does it with other people like Tolkien we talked about, and how we have the riddling contest here in the Wastelands, which is a perfect mirror with the riddling contest with Bilbo and Gollum, in that our protagonists are dealing with a character, Blaine, who has a split personality, who is like Gollum, and it's riddles. And so it's just a wonderful little tip of the hat to Tolkien in there as well. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of stuff is going right now because I haven't read anything else by King. So there it is. But when I read The Stand and when I read all this other stuff, I'll have my reverse Easter egg.
A lot, and I think you'll be good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I have a lot of theories too about real subtle stuff, like the red flowers are very subtle, and yet I think they play a much bigger part, even if it's just an obscure part in the story. At least my theory is that those, because we got Jake in the vacant lot with the one single flower. My theory is actually that the flowers are representative of all of the other worlds than these.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, good night. There's just a ton of different worlds.
Yeah.
That's my theory anyway.
I like it, and it fits with Roland's vision at the end of the Gunslinger after his palaver with the Man in Black, right?
Right.
That was some pretty trippy stuff right there.
Like the sun that's inside of the rose. That's some messed up stuff. Ain't it? Deep.
Yeah.
Think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, there's just so much to chew on here. Do you guys have any further thoughts on any other characters like Jake or Blaine or anything you missed that you'd want to remark on? And spoilers up to the Wastelands?
Yeah, I think Oi is going to be the one who makes it to the Dark Tower. Be the last one standing.
I just want to say I really like the secondary characters too. Like, we get and I like how he turns some of those genre conventions on their head. Like, we get the elderly mentor in court, but he is going to pistol whip you. He's not going to gently guide you to anywhere.
Right.
So I find his secondary characters to be very vivid as well. And I really like that part. And as Mike said, we'll talk more about maybe some of those other characters after book 4. But I do enjoy that it's not just the main characters, because some fantasy authors are really great at crafting a main character, but the secondary characters fall flat. And I don't think that's the case here. I feel like I know a lot of these characters, even down to the cook. You get to know his motivations and you see the emotional impact that has on Roland. It comes up as, he was a big part of his life. And the things that he taught him helped Roland throughout the other books. And so you get to see those little connections too. So I don't think that Stephen King ever loses sight of that, which is also very impressive.
There are no throwaway characters in a Stephen King book. They all
exactly.
Differentiate every one of them. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, they're all so vivid, and that relationship with Court is actually we basically get in flashbacks. But it's so important because it informs how Roland relates to Jake, how he relates to Eddie and Susanna, and how he teaches them to be gunslingers. And the brutality of the mentorship, between Court and his pupils is, that scene in the Gunslinger, which we get in flashback of Roland, it basically has to fight Court in order to pass this test. It is brutal, but there is this there's this, it's bloody and it's nasty, but there's this respect between them as well. I mean, that's some tough love right there. I
Make
guess.
sure you have an animal companion that's a hawk that will come fight for you, and you're good.
Yeah, that comes in handy. Although it's not as cute as Oi. But,
No.
Right. Not nearly as cute as Oi.
Yeah. Wow.
Got to have a talking animal companion.
The whole reason I want this to like go to series on like Netflix or something, be like really huge, is that one day I can get me a cute little plush animal of Oi. Put on my shelf with the rest of my Stephen King stuff.
Yeah. We got Grogu. We got to have Oi now.
Yeah.
You know.
But it has to be a talking one where you pull the string and it says, Oi.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Whatever you say, he just repeats.
You got to trademark that idea, Philip. You know.
Oh yeah, that's how I'm gonna make my big bucks, right?
This is where this is all headed.
Yeah.
The
So
path along the beam.
I was told BookTubers already make big bucks. I mean, I'm still waiting for
Right. Yeah. That's a long time coming for me, but
I think you would know better than most anyone else about that. But yeah. So well, this has been such a pleasure and such a delight and honor, really talking with all three of you about this series. You guys have me really excited to keep going in the Dark Tower. Like I said before, Mike, you're the one who inspired me to start it in the first place. So it's so great to talk to you about it. Sarah, I just love your insights. I feel like I understand these characters a lot better. And Chaz, we're going to go on this Dark Tower journey thing together here, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
All the way to the tower, right?
All the way to the tower. And I really hope that we can do another one of these so that we can discuss more about the next books. If you're up for it, I am.
Oh, for sure. I mean, for me, this is what BookTube is all about. Having these discussions, these conversations. I always learn the most when I'm talking to you people. So I appreciate you all. And thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Philip.
Yes, thank you,
Likewise.
Philip.
My reread's gonna be a little slower than yours, but I can't wait to see your reactions to some of these things. So
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it.
All righty. We'll see you all later then.
All right. Thanks, Philip. Bye.